7, so I believe we in fact do have a quorum, so we'll call the meeting of Children and Youth to order, and we'll ask Representative Chuck Williams to give our invocation. Chuck?
Madam Chairman, if you will, let's pause for a moment of prayer. Our kind and gracious God and heaven, Lord, as we gather here in the people's house, we would just ask that you remind us as needed, Lord, of what really is important, and remind us, Lord, that although we think that everything that happens here is important, certainly the business of our children and youth of the state are paramount. So in that vein, Lord, we just ask that you give us the guidance and the wisdom to do your will, that everything that's said and done here will be pleasing to you. For in your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a continuation of our program from last week with some added attention to the early care and learning, and we have Susan Adams, who is the Assistant Commissioner, who is going to start our program, and then we'll go into the rest of the program as we roll into it, okay?
All right.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you for giving us an opportunity to talk today. My name is Susan Adams, and I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Georgia Pre-K at the Department of Early Care and Learning. I was asked today to spend a little bit of time talking to you about curriculum and what goes on in the environments for our children 0 to 5. Really going to focus on those years between 0 to 5 and what should be happening in all the types of programs that children are being served in, whether they may be a child care learning center, whether they may be a Head Start program or early Head Start program, a family daycare home, a Georgia Pre-K class. This really looks at all the elements that should go into those programs. If you look at the chart I have up here, you'll see some of the elements that should be in an early learning environment. You'll notice that a lot of these are the same things that you're going to see in K-12 classrooms. If you look on the left with structure, this is about the what, the who, and the where of a classroom. So this is going to be things like curriculum, learning standards, the materials that are in the classroom, and the training and education of the people that are in those classrooms all are very important elements. If you look at over on the right, you're going to look at the process. This really is about the how. How do teachers, how do programs use that structure in the program to be the better for the children in that program. And of course, these two elements together combined are going to look at the children's improvement in their social and also their academic development. As you look at process, I'm going to talk a little bit about process today, and then we're going to talk more about structure. As you talk about process in an early childhood environment, teacher-child interactions are what's going to be key. Regardless of whether it is a half-day faith-based program or a Georgia Pre-K program, it's the adults in the classroom and how they're working with the children and those interactions. They're really going to be crucial to the development of those children. One of the things that you want to look at is that it is going to be a little bit different as children get older. So as you look at an infant-toddler classroom, learning is going to really evolve around relationships and responsive caregiving. So this is really about how do the adults in the classroom interact with those children, how do they use those materials, how do they respond to the children that's going to promote that social and academic growth. That's one reason that when you talk about our infant and toddler classrooms, you're looking at that lower ratio of adults to children, because then they're going to have the ability to interact with those children. As you look at preschool children, and this is getting into your 3s and 4s and 5s, you're going to see that learning is going to emerge through exposures to concept, to activities. Adult-child interactions are just as important, but you'll also see that learning is going to involve more concept development in those ages. So let's talk a few minutes about structure. Key elements of a structure of an early childhood environment are going to involve things like materials, and a lot of you are familiar with the materials that are going to be in an early learning environment. Kids need things to interact with. Your 0 to 5 population is going to learn through hands-on interaction with materials. So they need books to handle, they need blocks to stack and count, they need lots of materials in those classrooms. standards. And when you go into an early learning environment, you can look in there and say, yes, this environment has the kinds of things that a program has that children need. But you may go in one and think, I'm not sure they have everything that kids need. We're going to talk a lot today about standards and curriculum and what that looks like for the 0 to 5 population. And then, of course, the other structure there is going to be training and education. It's just as important. If you have the best materials in the world and you have great standards for kids to learn from and a great curriculum, if you don't have teachers in that classroom that have the training and education to know what to do with those materials, how to interact with those kids, then you don't have the full picture of what you need there. So training and education is going to be very important in your 0 to 5 population. So one of the things that you hear a lot about in education is about standards. Georgia is a standards-based state. That means that all instruction for children is based on standards. And what are standards? They're simply what should children know and be able to do at a specific age. For older children, it's what you're supposed to learn in 3rd grade and what you're expected to be able to master in 3rd grade. But there are standards for young children, too. They're called early learning and development standards. And those standards look at what are children expected to do at each age level. To give you a little national context about standards, there's been a lot of movement around standards for the 0 to 5 population. Recently, Head Start just revised their standards for all children enrolled in Head Start programs, and those came out last year. And then, of course, you know that the Common Core for children in grades K through grade 8 came out, and Georgia is a Common Core state. So there's lots of information about standards. So what does that mean in the context of Georgia with our 0 to 5 population? Georgia as a state has really already invested significant energy into standards for children 0 through grade 12. So in Georgia, there are standards that have been developed to tell you the expectation for parents and for teachers about what children are expected to do and how they're expected to perform, whether it be for an infant in an infant toddler classroom or whether it be for a 3rd grader. In Georgia, we've had what's called the Georgia Early Learning Standards, which are for children 0 to age 3. And we've had the Georgia Pre-K Content Standards, which were developed for children that are 4 in the Georgia Pre-K program. But Georgia really took the opportunity to look at all of the national trends around standards, which look at rigor, looking at are children getting what they need to be successful in today's economy. And that's one of the reasons that the Common Core came out. Well, Georgia, our department used some stimulus funds, and in 2010 we did use stimulus funds, and one of the projects that we did was an alignment study of the standards in Georgia, birth through actually age 3rd grade. Because what we know is that it's crucial that we get children to 3rd grade performing. There's lots of research that shows if you have a strong connection of children up to the 3rd grade, then you have children that are graduating from high school. So Georgia took the opportunity to look at their stimulus funds, and our department contracted with 2 national experts. They're the 2 top experts in standards that look at standards, which is Lynn Kagan out of the Teachers College. Lynn is the co-director of the National Family Center for Children and Families, and then Catherine Scott Little out of University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Catherine and Lynn are the experts when it comes to early learning and development standards in the nation. And Dr. Kagan actually also does international work on standards. Catherine Scott Little also worked with Georgia when we first developed the 0 to 3 standards. So what we asked them to go back and look at the standards 0 through age 8 and tell us how well are those standards aligned. Do we see standards that consistently follow children so that you're learning something when you're a 1-year-old and then that's built on as a 2-year-old all the way up to 3rd grade? It also looked at the between different domains. So whether they're learning in math, was it the same amount of rigor as in language arts? So they looked at that standard with us knowing that based on their recommendations that we would take their revisions and revise our standards in Georgia 0 to 5. And what is coming out is the new Georgia Early Learning and Development Standards that look at what's the expectation for children in 0 to 5, and those will be out this spring. Right now, we're working with the same researchers for them to go back and look at it and compare our new standards to the Common Core. Because when we started this process, the new Georgia Common Core performance standards weren't out. So we in our department are very concerned to make sure that our expectations that teachers use these standards to plan or the same and in line with the standards for our kids when they get into elementary school. So what does it look like? If you look right here, here are the domains that you would expect for our earliest learners. Physical health and motor development, social and emotional development, approaches to play and learning, communication, language arts, literacy development, and cognitive development. So what does that mean? If you look at the next chart, this really breaks it down into what you may be more familiar with in K-12. And we can see if it's a little too small, we can send it to you bigger. But if you look over at the cognitive area, that's going to break it out into the areas that you're familiar with for K-12. And if you'll notice underneath the domains, there's the strands. The strands are the same strands that are in Common Core, the ones that are appropriate for children 0 to 5. So now you'll actually be able to look at standards across a domain or across even a strand under a domain all the way from children that are infants all the way through grade 12 to be able to see what are the connections there and make sure that we're putting those crucial steps in so that children are prepared for instruction at the next age or at the next grade that they're going to. So as you look at these, let me give you a short example. If you look under cognitive development, and then you look under, look under language and learning. So we're looking at communication, language, literacy, and development. You'll notice one of the standards under there is early reading. So what does early reading look like for an infant? So in an infant classroom, they have a standard that says that infants are going to be learning beginning reading skills. So what does that look like? Well, if you go back to our structure of our classroom, we have the materials in the classroom that are appropriate for that. So in our infant environments, whether it's in a family daycare home or in a child care learning center, it's going to have appropriate board books for children. It's going to have sturdy books that they can manipulate, that they can chew, because that's how you explore as an infant. And what's the teacher going to be doing in that classroom? Well, she's going to be interacting with that child with that book. They're going to do a lot of lap reading where they're putting children in their lap and they're holding that book. What's that skill look like for a toddler? For young toddlers, you're going to see that those children begin to choose favorite books. And that's how that interest in reading is starting. They're going back to the same book that they liked. Or they're picking a book that's about a dog because they have a dog. What's the teacher doing there? She's modeling reading, and she's pointing to the book and saying, see the picture of the dog? There's the word dog for our infants and toddlers. So as you look at the standards, it's guiding not only what's the expectation for the children in the classroom, but what's the expectation for what teachers are going to do. Because when you get all the way to a 4-year-old in a Georgia pre-K classroom, their curriculum's going to follow those standards, or in a preschool classroom, it's going to follow those standards and show teachers how they're teaching the next step. It's also going to tell teachers what materials should be in that classroom and what things should be going on. What standards, to help you understand what they are the expectations of what should be going on with those children at a certain age, but they're not an assessment instrument. Standards are not used to assess where children are. Teachers have a separate instrument for that. And they're not a curriculum. We'll talk about what curriculum is, and they're not a mandated requirement for providers. Let me talk about that a little bit. As we look at what is the requirements for our licensed programs, our licensing looks at health and safety, and then we also look at mandates for what they're supposed to be doing in the program. They are required to have an activity guide for children. So every day they have to write a lesson plan for children as young as 6 weeks, all the way through their after-school programs. And those are based on these standards. But the curriculum that they use is going to be based on their needs of their program. As long as that curriculum's based on the standards, then they're going to be choosing something that's appropriate. So some programs are going to use a faith-based curriculum. Some are going to use maybe a curriculum that they use in all of their grades. Some choose one that's especially for infants or toddlers. So as we look at what curriculum is, curriculum really ties all these pieces together. When you look at what teachers should be doing, is they need to look at assessing children and what do children know, what children can be expected to do at a certain age, and they know that because of the standards. So they're going to set, their curriculum's going to help them assess children, and then they're going to plan. The expectation is for all the children in the program, every day you have a plan for what that child should be doing, what materials they should be exposed to, what activities you're going to do with them, and then you're going to do that instruction, and then after you've done that with that child, you're going to assess them again to see if they're meeting that standard yet. So a curriculum's really going to support this cycle of supporting children every day. So as we look at our 0 to 5 programs, to give you some information, and then Carolyn's going to kind of take over and start about some things. But one of the things that Chairman Manning asked about was in Georgia pre-K classes, what's the difference for different programs? A Georgia pre-K class is going to have to use a required, approved curriculum. So in our Georgia pre-K classes, what we do is we have curriculums that are submitted for approval, and they're reviewed, and the review is based on do they match up to our standards and to the assessment tool we use. And then we have a list of approved curriculums that programs can choose from. So they can choose the curriculum that best supports their program but meets the standards. Now Georgia Pre-K mandates that because we're paying for a certain program that they're implementing. With our new standards that are coming out, we will do a new review of curriculums for Georgia Pre-K based on the new standards. But we also want to support all programs that are working with children 0 to 5. So part of the new standards that come out, there will be training for all teachers that are working in programs, whether it's licensed child care or a family daycare home or a Georgia Pre-K program. And then in addition, we also are going to do a curriculum review compared to the new standards for all ages of children. Now those curriculums will be ones that will be reviewed by our department, and they'll be used as recommendations for programs so that they can choose the ones that best fit their programs. All right, and I'm going to turn over to Carolyn, and she has a clip she wants to show you, and then she has some other information to share.
Thank you. What I thought would be great is I think actions speak louder than words, and one of our centers in the state put together a very quick video for you. It's 3 minutes long, but just to demonstrate some of these things that Susan has spoke about. And we call it purposeful play, so while you might be looking in a classroom and think that they're playing, they're really doing a lot more, and they're meeting those standards. So I'm going to hope that you can get some sound on this. Let's see.
I think we're going to try to dim the lights so we can see that a little bit better.
What makes the first 5 years so important?
Can you hear this?
Because this is the time the young child learns to skip count as a precursor.
Bear with me for one moment. Let me see if I can turn up their speakers here.
You might want a microphone. You want to get a microphone and try to get it on it.
Okay. Now the find where the speaker is, right? Okay. If not, I will repeat
It's
it.
pre-K 101.
Exactly. I'm going to fail.
To strengthen and refine the muscles of the hand.
To strengthen and refine the muscles of the hand.
To understand place value.
To understand place value.
To make 1,000 bead chain by groups of 10.
To make 1,000 bead chain by groups of 10.
To write his name.
To write his name.
To create secondary colors from primary ones.
To create secondary colors from primary ones. To master the fundamentals of geometry. To multiply.
Count to 100 and see the numeric patterns that are formed while doing so.
To count to 100 and see the numeric patterns that are formed while doing so.
To understand the phonetic approach to reading.
To understand the phonetic approach to reading. To write equations and find their sums.
To care for themselves for their environment.
To care for themselves and their environment.
To complete a botany puzzle using clues based on sight and touch.
To complete a botany puzzle and complete it using sight and touch.
To understand the theory of conservation.
To understand the theory of conservation.
To differentiate by height,
To-
width, and depth.
To differentiate between height, width, and depth.
To prepare food for friends by following a carefully prepared sequence of steps.
To prepare food for friends by
Identify geometric shapes.
to identify geometric shapes. And to correctly match like items.
That is why preschool is so important.
That is why early education is so important. I think that demonstrates some of the domains that Susan was talking about and how you can really see math come to life in an early education. While you might think it's play, it's really purposeful play, and it's very hands-on, and it looks a lot different than K through 12. I want to thank you all for the while the room's filled up. Thank you for the opportunity to come here and speak. We really appreciate Chairman Manning's letting us do that. And I am my name is Carolyn Salvador, and I am actually the executive director for the Georgia Child Care Association. The Georgia Child Care Association is the state's association that represents licensed child care providers. We represent child care centers, approximately 700 to 800 centers across the state. These centers can look a lot different. They are your mom and pops in South Georgia. They are your large franchises, corporately owned child care centers, nonprofit, for-profit, faith-based, YMCAs. We really represent a full diversity of your child care providers in the state. And I want to again thank you very much for letting us do that, because what I'm going to talk about today is really bringing the provider standpoint and our voice to the table. We're very appreciative also of Governor Deal's focus on early education. It is truly wonderful to have a governor that believes in this priority, and also in his appointment of the new Commissioner Cagle, who has been such a collaborator to stakeholders and really views providers as partners. I want to talk to you about the numbers of early care first, and talk a little bit about, this is something that we may already know, but just the economic impact and the importance of early education in our state. It enables parents to go out and work and to financially contribute to our state. Not only is revenue generated by child care centers, by private businesses, but it also helps parents to go and find jobs. And as Susan spoke very well about the cognitive and social benefits of our young children, we're getting children ready on a path to learn to read by 3rd grade. It also contributes to a long-term economic development in our state. There have been different studies that show a return on investment as much as $1 to $7 per invested in child care, or 1 to 14. This is what we look like by the numbers, and just to kind of give you a snapshot, this is based upon 2006 economic impact, so these numbers are actually a little bit low, but the early education industry is worth $2.4 billion to our state. When you look at the extended economic activity around it, it's really a $4.1 billion industry. We support parent incomes in the range of $13.6 billion to $32.7 billion, which is very important, and we supply jobs of approximately 61,000 jobs in our state. We're serving a little bit less than 400,000 children in care, ages 0 to 4, with a heavier population of those children receiving some kind of subsidy. And there, as I said earlier, there's around 6,100 child care providers. Those are child care centers, family, and group homes. There's a lot of really positive things in our state that are going on in early education. We're very excited about them. Susan spoke about some of those. They're the revised early learning standards from 0 to 4. This really empowers providers on what children should be doing in the classroom, and then providers go out and integrate that into the curriculum, which makes the experience very meaningful for young children. And then we've aligned those standards into kindergarten, so the expectation of a child leaving pre-K is then matched up to what should be going on when children enter kindergarten. We all know that we have a nationally recognized universal pre-K program, and we have a new quality rating system, improvement system that Commissioner Cagle spoke about last week. And the other two I've mentioned, but I can't emphasize enough the fact that we have a commissioner that collaborates with stakeholders and listens to our voice, and governor leadership like yourself that are interested in children. Although we have a lot of positive movement in early education, we all know that we're in the kind of Great Recession, and that impacts child care providers and small businesses. In 2 years alone, over 921 child care centers actually closed their doors. That's a big number when you think of it. Started, just centers alone, it started close to 3,800 centers, and now 921 have closed their doors, with a very big job loss of about 14,000 for our state, and children that had to find other means for care. Child care providers, we really strike a balance because we are educators and we are also small business people. We toggle between trying to make sure that we're promoting quality in our state and we're keeping it affordable and accessible for parents. And I always say that a lot can be cured by funding, but we have a funding issue that's going on that's really hurting our ability to improve quality in our state and deliver the best level care that we can for the youngest children. And the funding's coming from a couple of different places. The first we know is a recession, but secondly, when we look at the first point is that our government is one of the largest purchasers of child care in our state, and it comes in the form of pre-K and also subsidized care. Those rates over time, not because of the current administration, but over time, two administrations have been, certainly in the Child Care Assistance Program, have been suppressed and not kept up with inflation. Our investment in pre-K needs to increase, and we've seen those rates per child and per pupil spending go down. All of those things contribute to a decrease in funding and hurt providers the ability to actually promote and improve quality. We have an unemployment rate in our state, which we know is high, and that actually impacts our industry because parents don't need full-time care, or they're actually asking centers to stretch their care and do other things, work later hours because they're taking a second job in the evening, or also maybe work or do part-time care. As a center owner, I actually am the executive director of Georgia Child Care Association, but prior to being the executive director, I owned a center in Gwinnett County for 9 years, and it was a nationally accredited center, so I understand really what it's like day in, day out. One of the things that I never realized before I got into this was the amount of accounts receivable that go into operating a child care business. You would be surprised, but parents, we have lots of working poor parents that may not qualify for the child care subsidy, but once they pay their mortgage, they pay their car, there's very little left over. And in the child care world, unfortunately, you get paid last. And so with the recession, there's an increasing amount of accounts receivable where providers are having to actually go out and try to chase down money. When I owned my center, it was hard enough on a Friday to collect payments from parents, but by Tuesday, it was really, I only collected about 60% of the outstanding tuition, which really is hard, and those numbers are increasing. Additionally, we have competition which hinders our ability to put money back into our programs for unlicensed programs which are unsafe because parents are seeking inexpensive care, and exempt programs that have proliferated around our state that don't have the cost of compliancy. This is a chart, and I apologize, it's really small, but it's kind of important to note because this is NACRA, which is the National Association for Child Care Resource and Referral Agencies, and it looks at states' affordability of child care as a percentage of mean income of a single family, and we do have a lot of single moms in our state, and looks at the affordability. Georgia is actually the 5th most affordable child care state, and we still know it's expensive for parents. Parents are struggling to pay their tuition. But it's important to note that because we find it very difficult to increase our rates and pass those along to families because we must keep it affordable. So this just kind of puts it in a perspective nationally of where we are. So when I spoke about the two pieces of our government with suppressing rates, the first one I just wanted to kind of update you on is the child care subsidy program, because this is really important. These are families that are low income. These are potentially children that are at risk. And this is an area where if we make great strides in this area, I really believe that we're going to improve quality. As it exists right now, we receive our money federally, and the federal government mandates that every state conduct what's called a market survey every 2 years to go out and look and establish what those rates are for child care. And the recommendation is that to give parents appropriate access to that care, they set the accessibility percentage at 75%. What that means is go out and do a market rate survey, tell me what it costs, and then let low-income families be able to obtain care at about 75% of what's available out there. The loophole is, however, that no state actually has to use that market survey. That's a good question. But it requires that you go and actually conduct the survey. And it also doesn't mandate the 75% is just a guideline to give parents choice. Right now, Georgia is currently using a market survey based upon 2005 rates that were established at 50%. How does that translate? It translates to, based upon the new market survey of 2011, that we're giving our lowest income families accessibility to the lowest 25% cost of care, which doesn't always translate to high quality care for those children. To show you just the difference of what it looks like, the green note looks kind of chartreuse here, but so the chartreuse bar here represents what the market survey shows you for 2011 for an infant. Says that 75% of availability, the rate is $200. Our current survey is based upon $139. So you can see a big gap by each age group.
You only get 50% of $139?
You get, $139 is the maximum amount that any family can get for an infant. And this is saying that based upon what the current market is bearing, it's upwards of $200. Parent fees also, if I'm a single mom, I go in and I apply for subsidy, and based upon my income, they determine what rate I will get. $139 is the max. A lot of families have to pay a parent fee because they believe in parent responsibility. So based upon my income, they might say the max we'll give you is $139 in Metro Atlanta. Your parent fee is $30. So the state reimburses me at $109 for care. I then, as a parent, have to go out and find care for $109 and then pay my $30. As I'm looking around, most of the care is much higher than that, so it's really hard for me to make a good decision about where to put my child. Additionally, what happens is that as a mom, I might say, you know what, I want to go to Susan Center because she delivers a really high-quality care, but her rates are $180. I've got this voucher in my hand for $109, so my responsibility is the difference. And that's really hard for parents of low income to be able to seek out quality and make that payment up. This just reiterates some of the points that I've made, and that quality costs money and parents can't afford that additional fee. Also, what happens as a child care provider, I would have parents come in and say, I want to be in your center because you're in Macy Center and you're in my area, and I really want my child there, but they have a subsidy stipend that says it's $109, and I charged $180. I would kind of do what I call the Monty Hall, let's make a deal, and even though I know I was not supposed to, I would lower my rates to help that parent get into my center because I knew they were really hurting and were child care providers are really trying to help parents, and you become part social worker when you own a child care center. So you try to help. So you're actually further diminishing your rates and your reimbursement rates. Providers that actually serve a high percentage of low-income children, if you can imagine, if the market's saying 200, you're getting 139, there's not a lot of additional funds to go around. That's not covering your operational costs, your teacher salaries, so they don't have that money to in turn put back into their program. And then if I'm a mom and I go out and look for care, the reality is there are many counties that don't have the availability to give me care, even though I may qualify. So we don't keep waiting lists right now in our CAPS program. I'm not sure why systemically if that was an issue, but we used to. So we really don't know how many children are not getting the care they receive, which is forcing families to then go and look for unlicensed or very inexpensive care. This just shows you the annual cost difference. To look at it for one child, that rate difference between what the current market survey is. And then just to kind of extrapolate it and kind of look at numbers, because I'm kind of a numbers person, is that, I believe these are in your packets too, looking at the cost difference for an infant, toddler, preschooler, demonstrating what that looks like on a one-year basis. If I'm a child care center and I serve, let's say, 25% of low-income children, which qualifies me maybe for the food program, and I have $120, if you look at that, $95,000 is roughly the average difference in funding shortfall. That $95,000, I can assure you, would go very far in improving quality, teacher salaries in the center, and would also give parents better access to quality care. But that's a huge number. If you move it over out to the right, it says centers serving 50% low income. We've got lots of centers in our state that serve upwards of 75 to 99% subsidized care. So if you look at that funding gap that it's creating, it's really hurting our ability to help our most at-risk children and improve quality. So we've got the CAPS program, and the other piece is our pre-K program, which is an amazing program to get children ready for kindergarten. However, over the years, we have seen funding per pupil spending go down. If you look at the inception of the program in 1996, it was roughly $4,100 per student, down to a projected for FY13, $35.61, which actually is a decrease of 13.5%. Looking at consumer price index, your inflation for that same period of time, consumer prices rose 43%. So we're really creating this gap of about 58, 59% in our pre-K spending. That's very significant. Comparing it to what we spend on a child that's in K through 5, the average spend is around $10,938, compared again to what we're projecting of $35.61 for a pre-K student. I can tell you in a center, typically your youngest children actually cost more because your ratios are lower. Additionally, DCAL has done a very good job at reassessing what the requirements are for providers and actually looking at ways to, those assessments that we talked about, putting them online, creating checklists, and a way to help improve our teacher qualifications. All of those things have, though, dramatically increased the administrative costs as well as the program. Additionally, we have what we call non-instructional costs. You've got teacher salaries, and then everything else is non-instructional costs to run the program, and I've listed all of them out. But you can see even some of those things like a pre-K program manager, their payroll, which is a requirement, goes into that. And those have actually declined in the cost per student spending per day over time. And what happens there is, because I'm mandated to actually pay my teachers a certain salary and have so much in supplies, I have to then basically use money from the other parts of my program to fund the shortfall in pre-K as a provider. That's money I could have used to improve my infant and toddler. So what does it look like going forward for our pre-K budget? Great news that we're putting 10 days back into the calendar, which will really have important outcomes for our 4-year-olds. We're very happy about that. And we're also restoring our teacher for our salaries. And that is great because we all heard the statistics that showed us what happened to our teachers as we had teacher retention rate drop dramatically in the past year. Unfortunately, there are no increases in operational costs right now for providers for supplying 10 extra days. So that's a big deal for providers because we already know that we're underfunded and now essentially being asked to provide 10 additional days with no funding for free, as providers are calling it. This actually translates to a decrease in providers' operational reimbursement rates and creates another shortfall just from funding levels of last year. Just last year, we know that that was cut by around $1,400 per classroom. If you look at it compared to 2010, which is where we're going back and restoring teacher salaries, it's an 18.2% drop in non-instructional costs, which really puts at risk our ability to deliver those outcomes for children. Teacher salaries, as I mentioned, are being restored to 2010-2011 levels with an incremental pay increase of 4.9%. Just to look at the numbers, the proposed teacher salaries is $31,500 compared to when we were at 180 days, which is $30,000. So we're actually giving teachers a raise for working 10 less days. We think that there might be opportunity in these numbers to adjust. We're very excited about teacher raises. We think that's imperative to pay our staff, but we want to make sure that there's two parts to the program. Those are non-instructional costs that must be covered to be able to make sure that children have crayons in the classroom, they have a clean classroom, there's rent, they have curriculum costs, mulch in the playground, all those things for 10 extra days. And we estimate the shortfall in funding right now is around $4.1 million. So there are two pieces that I mentioned that are kind of the child care providers that are out there that are really that are big pieces of our government, but there are other things that kind of impede our ability to really go out and put money back in. And we want this industry to succeed. We need it to succeed. There's no compulsory education before 5, so it's delivered by small businesses. I can show you and demonstrate for you where child care centers are actually thriving and are solvent. Those children have a much higher level of care. They put money back into the program. Where you go into classrooms and centers where they are hanging on what I call by their fingernails and they have no money left in the bank, those are the programs that we find that are the lowest quality programs. They're not paying their teachers higher. They're not turning it into materials. So there are demands and financial burdens on child care centers that I want to share with you that impact the ability to really do what we are all trying to work for in our state. Cost of compliancy comes from different places. We have county and federal levels that are asking us to do things that require funding. We have fire marshals in some counties where have new rules that are contradictory to those that are on our regulations. Regulations state that all child care closet doors must be locked, and we usually put those locks up high. Fire marshals are coming in telling centers that they actually now have to put locks in the inside of the closet so if someone's locked in, they can get out. That's a spend of $1,500 to just change those locks, which seems contradictory to our own regulation that we must have all closet doors locked. There's a new federal crib safety requirement.
How do you get in a closet if it's locked?
That's a very good point. In case someone left it open and a child got in and then someone locked it behind the child, I guess is the assumption. Federal crib requirements mandate that all child care center cribs are changed and have a new tag on them. So that's a huge cost for centers, estimated between $2,000 and $3,000.
Why?
There were cases where children had died in pack-and-plays, and they determined that some of the safety requirements were really based upon those pack-and-play, when I'm talking about pack-and-plays, and they went out and changed a rule federally to impact all cribs.
It was a Consumer Product Safety Commission that made that rule.
Even if your cribs are fine, there's nothing wrong with it, everybody has to get a new crib.
Yes.
In a child care center, and you have continuous supervision, so it's much different than in a home where you would leave, your child down for nap in their room, obviously. So, but where everyone is being required, and we can't even, federal requirement, we're being instructed that we can't even donate them anywhere. They have to be taken apart, and so that they cannot be used anywhere in the U.S. So.
This is just to highlight some of the issues that face the child care centers right now. We have increased administrative costs, as I'm sure many small businesses do, but to give you an idea, we're the point of collection for all immunization records for children. And so just even manpower hours to track down, if you'd imagine, every parent to make sure that they're up to date on their immunization records. And if they're not, then we have to have waivers and we have to follow up with parents. Again, cost of compliancy. And we've had pre-K teachers that are actually going out and being able to qualify for unemployment benefits during holiday breaks. So when they're supposed to be working on Christmas time, getting unemployment, or at summertime. So when their annual salary and their annual contract is really is meant for 12 months, they're actually going out and getting additional monies over the summer. I had a pre-K teacher call me the other day, and we were able to work with the Department of Labor and getting this rule clarified to extend benefits for pre-K teachers so that it's similar to what with public schools. But I had a pre-K teacher call me and be very upset with me. How could we change that rule? Because she was counting on getting unemployment again this summer, and she had collected it for the past 5 years.
Chair, I have a question.
Wait just 1 second.
You said in your comment about your a contact point for immunizations. Do you guys collect the immunization record?
Yes.
Or do you enter that into the GRITS database?
We collect them. We collect them and have to collect them and have to show a report that we have a certain percentage of compliance in the center.
Okay. Are you entering them into the GRITS database? No.
No.
Okay.
Oh, hang on a second, please.
The other unemployment situation that we were not able to address with the Department of Labor because they said it was a constitutional issue was that when the state cut the teacher salaries last year, those teachers were able to go collect and decide they did not want to return to the job making $3,000 less, even though it was offered to them, and they were able to successfully get unemployment benefits because the 20 days were taken away, so they were earning $3,000 less, which makes our experience rating on our entire payroll go up and increase unemployment payments across the board.
That's unreal.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Excuse me?
I have a question. I've experienced the same thing with trying to offer people jobs. They don't want them as long as they're getting unemployment. So are the teachers paid according to this salary schedule? Is this the state salary schedule? Are they employed by the state?
They're actually employed. It's a public-private partnership, a contract, so you are instructed to pay teachers. It's 90% of lead teachers. You want to take that, Susan? But yeah.
Are you asking about pre-K, Georgia pre-K
Yeah, because you've got
teachers?
certified and 4-year and 2-year, so.
Georgia pre-K, our department does a grant agreement with local entities, whether it's a child care center or a school district, and we pay directly as a grant to that entity. And then we have requirements around the minimum salaries that must be paid to teachers based on the days that they work and their credential. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and then when did the state start paying for daycare? Because when I was a single parent, I paid for daycare myself, and I mean it was like 2/3 of my paycheck, and it was a struggle, but I had to do what I had to do. So I didn't know the state was paying for.
Well, with pre-K, we fund the pre-K program through lottery dollars. The CAPS program is currently through the Department of Human Services, which is for families that are eligible and qualify for the subsidy.
So when there's the gap in what you get from the state and what you charge, then the parent pays for that.
Correct.
They pay the difference.
Correct.
Okay.
I think I saw another hand somewhere. didn't I? Anybody got a question over here? Chuck?
You talked about under the restoration of the 10 days, that was good news, but you referred to a lack of, was it operational
Operational
funding? I'm new to
expenses.
this committee. Would you explain really what those dollars would represent and how they compare as far as in comparison to the actual restoration dollars, how what the relationship is as far as dollars to dollars?
Sure. Currently, what we've seen in the budget is the restoration dollars, the actual dollars remain the same. For supplying, it's, I think, $22,536. Is that right, Ray? And so the actual dollars remain the same for 10 additional days. So and what goes into that is essentially, as Susan talked about, that it's a contract or a grant agreement. So think about pre-K being delivered in 2 of your classrooms right now. So you have rent in those classrooms essentially, for 2 weeks. Your utilities, you're paying someone to come in and clean. Your cook to cook the meals. Your every bit of curriculum that goes on. Your papers, your pencils, your crayons, all of that, any additional supplies that you need for 2 weeks, and even in some cases, like for your project director, we are required to have a project director that oversees that program. There's no incremental salary for the 10 days for that project director. So when you take that, and really it's kind of hard to compare because we're looking at 22 children for 160 days compared to 22 children on 170 days. So you really have to look at it per child, per day spending, and that's really, and then build it back up, if that makes sense. Because 2 years back we had 180 days with 20 children. So if you compare the cost per day per child compared to where it was last year and then certainly 2 years ago, there's a dramatic decrease in funding. And then I want to say one more thing too, is that there's an opportunity cost. When we went to a 160-day calendar, a lot of programs use those 2 weeks, if you will, to go out and extend their summer camp or their preschool programs utilizing those classrooms. So they were able to have tuition coming in for those 2 classrooms. Now that takes away the ability of programs to actually do that, and it increases your cost with no reimbursement behind it and no ability of offset of tuition.
I'd like to take a minute here and introduce Ray Higgins, who is the CFO. Ray, you want to weigh in on this?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Can everyone hear me okay? You're on the All right. Thank you for that. Let me first, I must apologize because I probably shouldn't speak to the Child Care Association's numbers at this time. We probably need a chance to review that packet and some of those numbers that were handed out at the beginning of the meeting, but I'm very familiar with some of the ideas behind it. Just need a chance to review those in detail. What I can do for you is give you a recap of the current governor's recommendation. As they've stated, it basically extends the school year by 10 days of instruction under the existing formula. And to give a little bit more detail, the factor that drives the salary costs, or the funding for salary costs, was increased by around 4.4%, whereas the operating costs remained steady or level with this year's funding. The pre-K program, voluntary program, it's around $300 million in lottery funds. The current recommendation funds 84,000 slots, which should cover existing enrollment, and that will provide funding for around 3,800 classes, statewide. So be glad to try to answer any other questions or go into any other detail.
Well, we're about to give out of time, and I think we've got another question here from Representative Ash for our last couple of minutes.
And I think my question is really an invitation to members of this committee and for this conversation. The Education Appropriations Subcommittee will clearly be taking this kind of testimony and looking at these sets of numbers. And I'm sure Chairman Dixon would be delighted to have people come and participate and hear, because these are very disturbing numbers if they're accurate, and we got to figure out what we're doing in terms of quality that we talk about. We got to live it.
I'd like to ask one question. What happens when a kid does not go to pre-K or private pre-K? What happens to the development of that child? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Well, Really what it's about is what the experience of that child is having before they get to kindergarten. And we know that there are many children that have stayed home with parents and come to kindergarten ready. But we also know of a lot of children who haven't had a high quality experience that come to children not ready. It's really about what experience is that child getting, whether they're at home with a parent, or they're in a half-day preschool program, or they're in a Georgia pre-K program. It's really about how much that experience allows them to interact, to look at, be with materials, to have experiences. But what we know, too, is that the majority of our children aren't staying at home with parents. And we also know that a lot of our children that are at risk for entering school behind are not in high-quality programs.
One more real quick.
Okay.
You very kindly gave us the numbers piece. There were lots of other charts that you displayed. May we all have copies of those as well?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, Darlene, would you like to?
Thank you. I had a question about the curriculum and the mandated changes and things that are happening. My grandchildren happen to go to private schools, different communities, different parts of the state. They happen to use the Becca programs. Are they going to be accredited, or are they ones that are going to be thrown out?
The Becca program is a curriculum for 0 to 5 children, and for Georgia Pre-K, a Becca isn't a curriculum that's currently approved to be used.
Okay.
But that's only for a Georgia Pre-K program. Of course, and a Becca wasn't submitted for our curriculum approval process, I don't believe. For the upcoming curriculum approval, we will take, with the new standards, curriculums will be submitted. ABECA doesn't qualify for Georgia Pre-K because it's faith-based, and we can't have faith-based instruction in Pre-K because it's a state-funded program. However, for other programs that may be faith-based, other programs are not mandated what curriculum that they choose in licensed child care or in a private school. We need to look at curriculum that is aligned with the standards, but a faith-based curriculum would be appropriate for them to choose.
They're reading at 3 to 4 years old.
And I'm not saying it's not an appropriate curriculum. I'm just saying
Okay.
we got one here.
Sure.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about the curriculums that are the pre-K curriculums that are state-funded programs. You said they have to be approved. It's just for state-funded or for any?
It's for the Georgia Pre-K program.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, I believe, Jason.
Okay. You said that y'all have your own standards, and that's based on some Common Core state standards. Is that based on the National Common Core?
The new standards that are coming out are aligned with the Common Core, but then Georgia also has Georgia Common Core standards, which are aligned with the national ones.
Okay.
So they're looked at for both of those things.
And was that necessary to adopt in order to receive Race to the Top money?
Were for 0 to 5, was it necessary to adopt them? For the Race to the Top that Georgia currently has, it's just beginning in kindergarten. So it wasn't mandated for 0 to 5 to look at those
Are you all looking
standards.
to receive any Race to the Top money in the future for this type of curriculum?
We, of course, will apply if we're able to look at the Early Learning Challenge Grant. One of the strengths of the Georgia application was that we had done this work around standards.
Okay. I think we're going to have to close it there. Thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate very much your willingness to come 2 weeks in a row and continue to help us be educated on 0 to 5, because this is absolutely the most important program, or one of the most important programs for this committee. I will tell you we are off next week, so enjoy your Valentine's with your families, I hope. And the following week, on February the 24th, we will have a special program with the Department of Agriculture. So I asked my committee to, if you have a conflict, please see if we can work around it, because this will be the only opportunity that the Department of Agriculture will have to come to our committee for the legislative session this year. So with that, I'll stand a motion to adjourn. So moved. Thank you very much. Have a happy Valentine's.